Hi, this is Patricia McLinn welcoming you to this episode of Authors Love Readers podcast. I'm your host, but the stars are the authors who come and visit us here. We always have more material to cover than we can get in any individual show. So we're going to give you some compilations of all the wonderful material that has had to be on the cutting room floor, temporarily anyhow. Thanks to the wizardry of our editor, Dylan, we are able to give this to you in a new form. I really hope you enjoy it. I also want to say thank you so much to those of you who are supporting the show. We cannot continue without the support of our listeners, and that comes in multiple forms. Encouragement through sending questions to podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Of course, donating through patreon.com. That's Patreon, patreon.com/authorslovereaders. You can donate as little as $1 a month, but it helps tremendously to defray the costs of editing and hosting and recording. All of those add up. So we really hope you will support us that way, and also by letting other people know about the show. Of course, that's word of mouth, where you tell the people you know about the show, but also you can do that and spread the word to people you don't know by writing reviews and giving us ratings on the various sites where you listen to the show. All of those are so greatly appreciated, and we hope that the show can continue with your wonderful support. In the meantime, let's listen to this episode. Brenda Hiatt. Brenda played the 3 movies on a desert island game with us and talks about an inspiration that she substitutes for an inspirational view, but it works for her. Okay, I have a very strange desert island. This little island, you're stuck on it forever, but it has the ability to play movies, but only 3 movies. So you're going to get to have 3 movies on this desert island that you're going to watch over and over and over. Which 3 are you going to take with you?
I guess like a box set of a series is cheating, huh? I would say
you would not be the first.
I would definitely go with Princess Bride, and I think Galaxy Quest, because that just never gets old for me.
I love that.
I've seen it so many times and it never gets old for me. Those 2 are easy. Third one is a little harder because I have a lot of movies I like. I'm trying to think ones that I also just don't seem to get tired of, no matter how many times I see them. I really love Peggy Sue Got Married. That might be my number 3.
Okay. Interesting.
I've got a bunch of others, though. I like True Lies. I like, there are a bunch of a lot of rom-coms that I really enjoy. And a lot of action, sci-fi action type things too. I mean, okay, maybe the original Star Wars would be my number 3.
Oh, that's interesting, because your first 2 and your first choice of 3 were all had humor. And I guess Star Wars does have some humor.
First 3 movies especially. Now, when they went on the prequel trilogy, they pretty much left all the humor out. So
okay, I want to talk about some questions from readers, and let's start with a kind of ease you into it. This reader says, "What is your favorite place to write, and why? Does it have an inspirational view?" I think this reader hopes we have an inspirational view.
Occasionally I do write sitting, especially when I'm in Florida right now. I'm in Key Largo right now. We spend our winters in Key Largo now that my husband has retired. And I sometimes will sit out on the back porch, lanai deck, whatever you want to call it, and it overlooks the swimming pool and canal, which is a very inspirational view. And I sometimes sit out there and write. Most often, though, both here and in Indiana, I write on a treadmill. So it's really hard to set that up with an inspirational view because I have my monitors on a shelf on the wall in front of me. So so I don't really have an inspirational view while I'm writing on my treadmill.
So
That's where I do most of my writing.
Do you find that Well, no, the treadmill sets the pace of how fast you're walking, right? I was going to ask if you walk faster when you write faster or write faster when you walk faster.
I found that 1.5 miles an hour is about the fastest I can walk without making a lot of typos. If I try to walk much faster than that, my typing definitely deteriorates.
How long did it take you to get used to doing that?
Not very long, really. I think it was like, remember when they used to, maybe they still do. I just haven't had one in a long time. They used to do like Twitter chats.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
yeah, I was involved when I first joined Twitter many years back. I got involved in a few writer Twitter chats, and in one of those, the guest for that evening was talking about that he writes on a treadmill, and I'd never heard of that before, and I thought that sounded amazing. So I started researching that, and first I went to because sitting all day was really starting to bother me, bothering my back and my hips and my knees, and I was looking for alternatives. So first I tried a standing desk by just stacking a bunch of encyclopedias on my desk, because what else are you going to use encyclopedias for these days anyway? And so I had my keyboard at one height and my monitor at another height, just on stacked on encyclopedias. And I tried that for a couple of weeks, and I liked it better than sitting, but felt like I would like it even better if I were walking. So I bought myself a treadmill that was designed for that purpose. It's flat, doesn't have
Oh,
the
yeah.
upright part, and the control is separate on a cable and sits on the desk. And it did not take me long. I started slower. I started at barely over a mile an hour, and then gradually bumped it up to 1.5 miles an hour. But it really didn't take me very long to get used to it, and it really has saved my knees and my hips from the sitting
That's
all the time.
terrific. I haven't been doing as much as I like to because my dog has been on back-to-back 16-week confined convalescences from surgeries. Yeah. And since this dog can open doors with swing doors, pocket doors, and now she can open doors with doorknobs, I too have been confined. In the conversation with Paty Jager, she also got into talking about how she's growing as a person, not just as a writer, although growing as a writer also helps with growing as a person. She also talks about how she keeps on writing even after she has passed the beginning, which is her favorite part. Do you think you have changed as a writer, and whether it's your process or your approach, or can you look back to when you were first published and look at where you are now and see changes in evolution
Yes,
or
definitely.
revolution?
Yes. I keep telling myself that I will keep writing as long as I feel like I'm growing as a writer.
Mm.
And each series I do, each book I do kind of pushes me a little farther. And I really like that. I've always been the student that I took home schoolwork even when I had it all done. I always did the homework ahead of time. I love the learning process. And so writing for me just kind of seems the the best fit because it's just I get to learn new stuff all the time. I get to keep exploring and um, writing a little bit outside my comfort zone and just keep just keep going along and growing and so I do believe I have as a writer I've changed. um I don't I I don't know if I could say exactly what, but I have a friend. I'll go back to I have my friend that she's every probably 2 3 years she just keeps saying, I am so proud of you, you just keep growing and growing
Oh,
with you know
oh.
the whole everything, my being able to step out and talk to people. Which when I first started I just sat at a table with my little books And if somebody walked by, I'd kind of make eye contact with them. And now
Oh, books.
I can actually reach out to them, say, "Hey, are you a reader? Would you like to, I have this book about this." And where before I would just sit there and so I'm growing in so many different ways just from being a writer.
That's fascinating me because you touched on so many different levels of changing and growing and evolving. The that aspect, the kind of social aspect of it, and I always find it so much easier to sell other people's books than my own. At the
Yes.
at book
Yes.
signings and stuff, and it's one of the things I've loved about digital books because you can communicate through the computer and you don't have
Mhm.
to sit there.
Right.
One of one event in my life was being a Kmart blue light special.
Oh.
I thought I thought this is not fun. This is not what I want to do with my life. And then you also talked about the writing itself changing how and you growing with the writing.
Mhm.
And uh, and from that I want to ask you, and then I'll come back to another follow-up question on this. What is your favorite part of the process and what's the most difficult for you?
My favorite part is coming up with the initial idea and story and building the characters and just figuring out where the story's going to go. I just that initial part, just I just love that. It's like molding, it's like building something and you're molding like a clay vase or a whatever. The part I dislike is editing or revisions. I have
Uh,
I've always been the person that I will start from scratch and make something, like from clothing, but don't ask me to sew a button on, don't ask me to mend a knee, don't ask me to I I don't for some reason, I would rather start from scratch and do the whole thing than go and fix something. So the editing and revision part is like pulling teeth, but I know I have to do it. I mean, it's so essential to make a good story. So I know I have to do it, but that's
mm.
the one that I just really drag my feet and procrastinate the days I have to do that. And then it just makes it worse.
So the question is probably going to reveal more about me than the answer does about you. But you said you like the part where you're creating the world and the characters and putting that all together, and you do that at the beginning, and you have that. You said you sort of have this um, uh, information for you before you start writing. So my question is, if you already have that, and that's the satisfying part, why do you write?
Because I know who they are and where they're starting, but I don't know where the adventure's gonna take them.
Ah,
So the
okay,
writing is
okay.
taking them on the adventure of the story. Does that make sense?
Okay, so you're not doing an outline of the whole story.
No, 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 no. I am not an outliner.
Okay,
No.
okay,
I just get a
okay.
feel for them. I just get a feel for them and the main characters in the story, and I just figure out where I want it to start. And then, a murder mystery, you gotta figure out who did it. So basically your storyline is set, you just fill in all the adventure in there, everything that happens.
Anne Charles. In our conversation, Anne Charles talks about sayings that have continued on from her childhood and how they work for her. She also gives us an insight into her joy of writing and creating and how that is beyond monetary success or fame. How about sayings? Do you have sayings that you like, and do you have any in particular? If your mom and dad said them, then now you hear yourself saying them. But any saying.
Well, because I have kids, and there's something that my dad always said and still says to me as an adult child, and I say to my kids now, and that's, nobody ever listens to me. I tell you how this is going to go, and nobody listens to me. And, Dad said that over and over again growing up, and I would blow him off. And now here it is out of my mouth every day, just about. You're going to stab yourself with that. Oh, it happened. Nobody listens to me. So, I mean, that's a real strong one. And then there's other, when it comes to writing, there's one of the things I often I say, because you know how this is. You're trying to get an ad, you're trying to get a booking, you're trying to get something for promotional purposes, and it doesn't work. And you can either take it personal, or one of the things I say is, it just wasn't meant to be. I'm not supposed to go that route. So I just have to figure out what route I'm supposed to take. So a lot of times my husband will hear, it wasn't meant to be. That's okay. I'm cool with that. I wasn't meant to be a superstar. So I'll just deal with, toiling away for the rest of my life. That's okay.
I was at a conference a long time ago, and it was all people multi-published sitting around in a big circle. And somehow the question came up of whether you would rather be a career writer or write one big, huge book and never, have to write again because you made so much money on it. So it's so hugely successful. And I was astounded that anybody picked the one book. I can still remember the shock that anybody would pick the one book versus having a career in writing.
I'm with you on that. Why? I mean, part of the fun of this, the torturous fun,
Yes.
is writing books and writing more books and telling the stories and building worlds in your head, and friends in your head that you've created. The characters, they really do become your friends on the page. So I don't know about you, but if I go too long without creating, my husband will say, you need to sit down at your computer and write a little bit, because you're getting a little crazy. That creative outlet, you got to get it out, or it comes out crazy, or, angry, or something. So I can't imagine. It'd be sure nice to have that one book, but then again, I think it would be intimidating because you're always going to be compared to that one
yeah.
book.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of, how do you shake that off to do other things?
Right. Well, it's good, but it's not as good as your such and such. Oh, you'd be like, oh man, why do I keep doing this?
I had a fellow writer tell me one time that when I was lamenting that I wasn't good at schmoozing at publisher parties, and she said, if you succeed at something, you're stuck doing that forever. And I thought, wow, that's really true. So if I did succeed at schmoozing the people at publishing parties, I'd have to do that all the time. Never mind.
Yes. Forget it.
Yeah, yep. That made that really easy. And I apply the same things to the idea with the books. If you wrote that one huge mega seller, you'd be expected to do that over and over again. Julianne MacLean. Julianne MacLean, in our conversation about what happened and how it felt when she first got published, she gives us an idea of how it made her conscious of giving the publisher what they wanted. And then she talks about the journey that she's taken from traditional publishing to indie publishing, and now back to traditional publishing, but with an eye more on her own desires as a writer. When you published your first book, did that change how you wrote? Did that have any impact?
I would say yes, but only because not necessarily. What it changed was how, when I thought about what I'm going to write next, I was more conscious of what editors wanted to buy and what would sell, because at the time we couldn't self-publish. This would have been in 1999, and your only way to write books was to give an editor what they wanted. So I was very conscious of, if I knew I was going to target a certain publisher and a certain editor, I would look at who their authors were and what kind of stories did they like. And so it really had to write to please the market, and the market's not necessarily the readers, it's the editors who are buying stuff. So I think I became conscious of that, and it affected what types of stories I was going to write and the types of plot lines I would come up with. And now, thank goodness, because of self-publishing, and I've been able to write that whole Color of a Heaven series, just what I wanted to write, with not worrying about who was going to buy it, except for the readers, of course. But so I'm certainly I've become more, there's more freedom creatively, more creative freedom these days to write the types of stories that I want to write without worrying about, necessarily what an editor wants. And now that I'm back publishing traditionally with Lake Union, I'm determined not to change that, right? And if they don't like it, then I'll have to write something else for them because, I'll do something else. I don't know, because I had a 2-book contract just now with Lake Union, and I sold the first book. It was all written, and they bought it, was already written, so they knew it was appropriate for their line. So then the next book that I didn't even get a green light from the editor. I was like, I want to write this story. I'm just going to start writing it, and I did. Because if I had asked permission and they said no, I think I would have lost my mind. And so I just thought, I'm just going to start writing this. And I was more than halfway through before I even told my agent and editor what I was doing. And at that point, and I didn't, submit a proposal or anything. I had to write what I wanted to write. That's what I was inspired to write. And I think this change in how, like, the industry where authors, can find readers more easily, I think it's been great, like, creatively, for authors to be able to write what we truly want to write and not be constrained by, what other people think we should be writing, I guess.
Well, and I think even if it doesn't sell as well, there's something about the need to write what you want to write, or what story is speaking to you.
Yeah.
That if you don't do it, it sort of clogs up the whole system.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Now, how was this book? This is the most recent one you've been working on.
Yes.
That you were talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where in the joy to write continuum does this book fall compared to others?
Well, the one that I just finished, which doesn't even have a title yet, that one at this moment in time would go, I would say, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. And 9 because it was exactly what I wanted to write. And part of it was being in London. I've been living in London for a year because my husband had to come here for work. So I just, I didn't know what I was going to write about when I got here. And just getting to know the city and the history of the city, I came up with ideas, and I had a wonderful time researching the book and writing it, and I felt good about the story the whole time. But it was long. Most of my books are 250 to 300 pages, and this one ended up being 550 pages. And it was the book. I know I've never written anything that long before, but I feel like, because I spent so much more time with it, that I was very connected to it, and I feel good about it. And I really enjoyed, it was just a different sort of story. It was a dual timeline book, so it goes back and forth in time between contemporary times and World War II. So it was very challenging. It challenged me, because nothing's worse as a writer when you feel like you're writing the same thing over and over, and it can feel stale for the author if you're kind of forced to do that. So this one was nothing like anything I'd ever written before. So it was new to me. It felt fresh to me. So I would give it a 10 out of 10 for that. But I'm nervous about the editing process that we're going into, because I just turned it in 2 weeks ago. So now my editor's going to come back with comments, and because it's so long and I'm actually very happy with the way it is, I think I'm going to have a harder time editing it, where in the past I don't know, I don't mind working on something and making changes, but I almost feel like, no, don't change it. There's things I can beef up, but I'm really, really hoping I'm not going to get they're not going to request that I change things too drastically, because it's such a complicated plot line that it'd be like pulling a thread that could unravel the whole thing. And I'm kind of dreading the editing process right now, but hopefully it'll be all right. We'll see. I'll tell you 3 months from now if I still have, if I don't have a whole head of gray hair. We'll see.
Nancy Warren. Nancy Warren and I got talking about the books of childhood, and she tells us about how they propelled her into a life of authorship. She also talks about how writing a mystery, where you might think it's all about details and keeping track of clues and what's happening, Nancy gives us an insight into how it's more about being a people person. In your childhood, did you have a book that just opened the door to you for story, where you said, wow, yes, this is going to be my life?
I have two. So when I was much younger, Nancy Drew, and of course my name is Nancy, and so I felt a real connection to Nancy Drew, and the team, and I loved everything about those books, and the way that she would always figure out what was going on, and so no surprise that I've ended up writing mysteries. And my other one would be Pride and Prejudice, which my mother gave to me when I was so young. I thought it was called a Pride and Prejudice. But when I finally did read it, it's still my favorite book of all time. And I still go back. There isn't a thing you can't learn about writing that isn't in Jane Austen's books.
Do you know how old you were the first time you really read it?
I was 12.
Wow, that is young to be reading it.
Yeah, and I don't think I understood it, and then when I read it again, probably when I was about 15, and I probably read it every couple of years since then, and you always get something different out of it.
That's amazing. Although I gotta say, I read A Christmas Carol most Christmases, and the same thing, even though it's significantly shorter, but you're picking up different things because reading's so interactive. What you bring to it as a reader is different each time.
That is so true. And do you find, like I find, particularly with a book like Pride and Prejudice, even though I've read it, 100 times, I can't put that book down because I'm convinced that this one time they won't get together at the end.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I tend to reread books for the journey. So a book I really, really like, I could reread and not read the ending.
Yes.
Because the ending isn't as important to me as the getting to the ending.
I so get that. Yeah.
I often think that we are very observant, but we let it in too much.
I think so. I agree with you. Obviously, we're observant, and maybe for me, not always. I'd be a terrible detective. I'm not very good at details, but I'm very good at people. And I think, that sort of understanding when people say something, that what they're really trying to say, perhaps, or, we can read someone else's pain or their joy. I think can be really quite interesting and very helpful, of course, when one goes to build a character.
Absolutely. And, you're talking about subtext and reading what's really going on. It's so interesting to me to come away from a conversation and have somebody who's maybe not as attuned to subtext, and you're going, whoa, did you get such and such? And they're going, huh?
I know. They just take things at face value. But of course, people do have subtext. And we communicate in so many more ways than simply our words that, to me, that's what's fun. That's one of my favorite things about being a writer, is creating someone that has that sort of complexity.
And one of the challenges, too, because so much of subtext is intonation and gestures and expression and timing, and that's very difficult to convey in the written word, where the word choices, I think, have to take a lot more of the weight.
Absolutely. And of course, for those of us, and you also write mystery, and I love your mystery series, by the way. I think it's brilliant.
Oh, Oh, thank you.
But for those of us who write mystery, and you're always being so careful to sort of try and encourage the reader to look the wrong way, but also, of course, we're trying to put in these little complexities about subtext, and so it's quite a fine line we walk, isn't it?
It is. It's a good thing we get to go back and change things.
Yes.
I have been known in conversations to say, "Wait a minute, backspace delete."
I know.
I want to go back and rewrite
that. There's parts of my life I would like to do that with. Yes.
Pamela Fagan Hutchins. Previous jobs that Pamela Fagan Hutchins has held all led to her writing. She tells us about how that worked, how every one of those contributes to her writing. And then she also takes us inside the impact of experiencing hardship secondhand. What would you be doing if you were not writing? And have you had any weird jobs?
Well, so in my past life, I don't know if this is weird so much as all roads led to being a writer, but I was a private investigator. I've been an executive coach and also did a whole lot of report writing with both of those different pieces of my career. Started out as a lawyer, worked as a human resource executive. So everything for me either had to do with writing, fact finding, or analyzing people, and to me, writing is about authentic characterization, creating a reimagined life where we care enough about a character and their circumstances and believe enough in its authenticity that we can suspend our own reality and go on this ride with them. That's what drives what I write. And so everything I did felt like it was leading up to that place. I've had my share of working at McDonald's, working at a movie theater where I served popcorn to Mike Reno of Loverboy, I will have you know, when I was a teenager. Worked in a yogurt shop. I was a perfume girl for Dillard's, a waitress, all kinds of stuff. I was a computer programmer. Just normal type of jobs, but they gave me such a appreciation for all the different. I mowed lawns. I forgot that one. Mowed lawns with my brother during the summers when we were in college. So there was all these things that made me want to write. That made me want to tell stories about people. I'm a real collector of anecdotes about people, and I really got that in my past lives. If I wasn't writing, I would be running a horse rescue, a draft horse rescue. That's, of course, if I had enough money to do it, because those boogers eat. But if I had enough money, I would be running a draft horse rescue.
So why did you not continue being a private investigator?
Because it was about stories I didn't want to tell. I had a lot of stories I wanted to tell, and other people's stories were getting in the way. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense. It was it's not unlike journalism, I would think, to a certain extent. You're spending a lot of time writing. You're spending a lot of time doing the bones of what is storytelling, but it's not that story of your heart. And I think that in addition to my one theorem I gave a minute ago about, to me, writing is about the characters and authenticity and complexity and the reimagined life, blah, blah, blah. The other is that writing is about writing what you love. Otherwise, it's just any other job. And most writers I know aren't getting fabulously wealthy. Mm-hmm. They are working extremely hard. Mm-hmm. They face a lot of criticism, founded or unfounded. It's still criticism, right? And it stings. And if you're not loving what you're doing and writing stories that you love, that's not a lot of reward. The reward is in the doing. And so the reward was not in the doing for me in investigating other people's stories and writing their stories. The reward in the doing was with my imaginary friends, writing stories that were reimaginations of that kind of thing I was exposed to in my other life.
And I was thinking about brain science says that when we read stories or when we experience stories, the same parts of our brain are stimulated as when things happen directly to us.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are dealing with stories that as a writer or as a reader, if you're dealing with stories that don't appeal to you, you are stimulating those parts of your brain as if those things were actually happening to you.
Yes.
So that's a real downer.
It's an extremely big downer. And if we take that to your original question about why am I not still doing that? A lot of times what you're investigating is the absolute worst part of someone else's life.
Yes.
And so you're experiencing with them trauma, heartbreak, disappointment, fear, humiliation, at the very least. And so going through that over and over again and forcing yourself to have a stake in it when it shouldn't have been yourself that was at stake is emotionally exhausting. Whereas within a book, you're in control. I still cry with the characters, when they cry, and I laugh when they laugh, but I'm in control of that one, and I'm not experiencing it over and over and over and over in a way that I have to learn to cope with and slough off to keep moving forward. And that's a lot of what that life of mine was like. It was too much.
That's the show for this week. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoy making it for you, and hope you'll come back another time and listen to Authors Love Readers at your favorite podcast listening site. In the meantime, wishing you lots of happy reading.